Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Two years and counting, the virus from China is not going away. Just when you think the world is going back to normal or a new normal, the virus strikes again in a different form. This time, it has mutated into a more dangerous variant. First sequenced in South Africa, the variant is now called Omicron. There's a story behind the name too. It should have been called She, some say. As per the Greek alphabet, we'll tell you all about it. Flight restrictions and travel bans are back. Stocks are falling the world over. There is panic. There is not enough information about what this variant can do, but there's enough to set the world on edge. Tonight on Gravitas, as we bring you up to speed with what's happening across the world, we will try to separate science from hype. Also on the show, the latest victim of China's colonialism. Uganda set to lose its only international airport to Chinese debt. China is also having a social media meltdown over WION's coverage of Taiwan. We'll show you how. Is Ukraine heading for a coup next week? President Zelensky makes dramatic claims. He's accused Russia and a Ukrainian billionaire of plotting against him. And from gender-neutral toilets to French pronouns, why some experiments may be defeating the purpose of gender neutrality. We'll bring you that story. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
13 months after the announcement of the constitutional divorce from the British Crown, the country has elected its first president to replace the Queen. On the 55th anniversary of Barbados' independence from Britain, Governor-General Sandra Mason is set to be officially sworn in as president on the 30th of November. Taliban sought the European Union's help in keeping Afghanistan's airport running during the talks with EU officials, as the bloc raised grave concern over the humanitarian situation in the country. Russian Defense Minister published video footage claiming to show a Zircon hypersonic missile being fired successfully. The advanced missile systems are capable of reaching speeds up to Mach 5. Honduran presidential candidate Xiomara Castro claimed victory as supporters danced outside her offices to celebrate the left's return to power. Charred vehicles and gutted buildings seen in Pakistan's Charsadda region after an angry mob set a police station on fire after the police refused to hand over a man accused of allegedly desecrating the Holy Quran. Serbia's downtown Belgrade saw large demonstrations, with protesters demanding action against rising air pollution. Demonstrators sought reforms to government policies with regards to the environment. A vigil was held on Folkestone Beach in England on Sunday for the 27 migrants who died last week as they tried to cross the channel from France. The migrants lost their lives after their boat capsized as they attempted to get to Britain. Streams of lava flowed from a new opening on La Palmas volcano as the eruption entered its 10th week, destroying nearly 3,000 buildings and forcing the evacuation of thousands. New Zealand have survived a trial by spin on the final day of the Kanpur test against India to earn a thrilling draw. The visitors were 79-1 at lunch, but were then reduced to 128-6 with 28 overs left as India's spin trio struck. However, debutant Rachin Ravindra held firm at one end and batted out 9 overs with last man Ajaz Patel to deny the hosts victory. Manchester United have confirmed the appointment of German Ralf Rangnick as manager till the end of the season. The 63-year-old former Schalke and RB Leipzig manager takes over from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who was sacked on November 21st. Rangnick is still awaiting a work permit and hopes to be in the dugout for United's Premier League clash on Thursday against Arsenal.
The Wuhan virus is back. It is repeating its old tricks. It has mutated again. The new variant is called Omicron. It is forcing countries to close borders and restrict flights. There is panic around the world. Markets are falling. It is like horror on loop. Like always, there's hype too, and lots of unanswered questions like, what is Omicron? Will it be sick? Are vaccines ineffective now? Are swab tests useless now? And most importantly, will Omicron trigger lockdowns again? In the next 10 minutes, we'll try to answer all of these questions. We'll tell you all that you need to know about this new variant. On Gravitas tonight, we've put together the most comprehensive report on Wuhan virus 3.0. This is a new chapter in the pandemic. We'll start with the 5 major developments from today. Development number 1, Omicron has spread to at least 14 countries already, 14. Most are in Africa and Europe. The variant was sequenced in South Africa first, now Botswana, Hong Kong, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, Israel, the Czech Republic, Australia, Portugal, Italy and Canada. They're all reporting their first cases of Omicron. Development number 2, clusters have been found outside Africa. Portugal detected one today, 13 confirmed infections at a football club in Lisbon. One player recently returned from South Africa. He was infected. Now 13 tests have come back positive. The patients are players and staff members. Development number 3, rich countries are ramping up booster shots. The UK now wants to give a 3rd dose to everyone above 18. The government has also made face masks mandatory once again in public spaces. Development number 4. India could have its first case of Omicron. A 32-year-old man has tested positive in Mumbai. He recently returned from South Africa. Now, we don't know for sure if this is the Omicron variant. The test results are still awaited, but there's a fear. And development number 5. The World Health Organization has issued a warning today. It said that Omicron can spread worldwide and it poses a high risk.
We don't yet know whether Omicron is associated with more transmission, more severe disease, more risk of reinfections, or more risk of evading vaccines. Scientists at WHO and around the world are working urgently to answer these questions. We shouldn't need another wake-up call. We should all be wide awake to the threat of this virus. But Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us.
It's not done with us, he says, of the Wuhan virus. And this warning is being taken seriously. At least 22 countries have imposed some form of travel restrictions already. 22 countries. Some have banned travelers from a few African nations. Some others have imposed stricter testing protocols. Now, these measures are on expected lines. They also show the failure of the global community. 2 years into the pandemic, we still haven't found better ways to deal with new variants. We are still blocking flights. We are still imposing travel restrictions. South Africa has criticized these travel bans. President Cyril Ramaphosa has called the restrictions discriminatory.
Now, these restrictions are completely unjustified and unfairly discriminate against our country and our Southern African sister countries. The prohibition of travel is not informed by science, nor will it be effective in preventing the spread of this variant. The only thing the prohibition on travel will do is to further damage the economies of the affected countries and undermine their ability to respond to and also to recover from the pandemic.
This is valid criticism. After all, South Africa did not try to hide the outbreak like China did. Remember, Omicron was first sequenced by South Africa, and almost immediately it shared the update with the world. It's a move that was praised by world leaders. Here's what U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said. And I'm quoting from that statement. Secretary Blinken specifically praised South Africa's scientists for the quick identification of the Omicron variant and South Africa's government for its transparency in sharing its information, which should serve as a model for the world. Blinken made these comments during a call with a South African minister. There is no doubt as to which other countries he was referring to when he said that this should serve as a role model for the world. Having said that, while Blinken made these statements, his country, his government, the United States, also the Europeans, imposed a travel ban. The restrictions led to hysteria. Global investors are tense. Indian markets closed in the green today, but there has been a lot of volatility through the day. Reports say investors could have lost 1.38 lakh crore rupees just today. That's more than $18 billion lost in a day. Asian markets have also stabilized, but the uncertainty remains. Vaccine makers are returning to their labs. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, they're all now planning to test their shots against the new variant. Some vaccine makers are staring at a lot of questions. Number one, do the existing vaccines still work? Number two, is a two-dose regime enough, or is a booster shot now necessary? Number three, is there a need to modify the vaccines to make them more effective, or can they use the same shot as a booster? The world needs answers to all of these questions immediately, because the Wuhan virus has made a declaration. It is not going away. The emergence of Omicron is a reminder. The pandemic is far from over. The variant is spreading, and we know that. I just told you it has reached 14 countries. We also know where it's spreading and what's being done to stop it from spreading. But how much do we know about the variant itself, Omicron? How is it different from Delta? Is it more dangerous? Also, what's with the name? Why is it being called Omicron? Who came up with this name? Who else but the Health Organization, WHO? It has been using Greek letters to refer to almost every variant of concern. That's because scientific names are too difficult to remember. So this is for convenience. Last year, they named the variant from the UK as Alpha. The one from South Africa was called Beta. The one from Brazil was called Gamma. The one detected in India was called Delta. A few others followed, and the latest one has been named Omicron. And in doing so, the WHO has skipped two letters that were next in line, two letters that many expected would come next. Nu and She. In the Greek alphabet, these before Omicron. They have no variants named after them. The WHO has decided to skip them. Why has it done so? It's a question that many are asking. Has the WHO clarified? Yes, it has. The global health body says it skipped the letter Nu because it's too easily confused with the word new, N-E-W. The Greek letter is spelled as N-U. It could have led to confusion, yes. What about She? The WHO says it skipped the letter She because it's a common surname. Not to mention the name of the president of the country this virus came from. The WHO made no mention of Xi Jinping. It said they skipped the letter Xi to avoid offending any culture or ethnic group. Some say it's a fair justification. Others say naming a variant Xi would have been poetic justice. American Senator Ted Cruz says the WHO skipped the letter Xi because it's scared of the Chinese Communist Party. And there are many who agree with him. Now, be that as it may, the variant is going to be called Omicron. The world is calling it Omicron now. And here's something that you should know. It is deadlier than Delta. The WHO uses these images to distinguish between the two. The most striking difference is the number of mutations in the two variants. The Delta variant has somewhere around 13 to 17 mutations. Omicron has a total of 43. 43 mutations, that's the highest on record. The second difference is the presence of spike protein, a protein that protrudes from the surface of a virus. It is the spike protein that helps the virus enter human cells. In the case of the Delta variant, the spike protein is scattered all over. But in Omicron, it is heavily concentrated in one area. Scientists say this suggests the possibility of more mutations in the future. They also say that Omicron's genetic profile is widely different from other variants. It does not seem to be an offshoot of the Delta variant or the Beta variant. It is a completely new lineage of the Wuhan virus. Next question. Does this mean the variant is more transmissible? Will it spread faster? Well, it's too early to answer this question. The number of people testing positive has gone up in South Africa, but there's not enough evidence to suggest if this is due to Omicron or simply because restrictions had been lifted. Studies are still underway to establish either. What about Omicron's severity? Will it make people more sick? Again, there's no clarity, no clear evidence to state if the symptoms associated with Omicron are more severe than other variants. However, the initial cases in South Africa were among university students, younger individuals who developed mild symptoms. So there are fears that this variant could target the youth more easily compared to other variants. There are also fears of reinfection. The World Health Organization says people who previously had COVID could become reinfected more easily with Omicron. They're more at risk, apparently. But this finding is based on preliminary evidence. More information is needed to confirm it. What about vaccines? Will they work on this variant? Again, there is no clarity, no clear answers. Scientists do not know how vaccines will fare against the Omicron variant. But given the fact that it has 43 mutations, this variant has the potential of evading vaccine-induced immunity. To what degree? Again, no one knows. For scientific studies to conclude. So don't panic just yet. It is important to know the kind of symptoms this variant is causing. Doctors in South Africa have made certain observations, and you must listen to this. The most important observation is this regarding Omicron. Patients infected with this variant are not reporting a loss of taste or smell. They're also not seeing a major drop in oxygen levels. Omicron is causing, quote-unquote, unusual symptoms, like intense fatigue and a higher heart rate. Symptoms that are not as prevalent in the previous variants. So if you happen to be experiencing them, our advice is go visit a doctor. There are still too many unknowns about this variant. Like I said, don't panic, don't believe or circulate unsubstantiated reports. We can all do without them. Follow the safety drill. You know it by now. Keep your mask on. It's still your best bet. And stay safe. Meanwhile, China is coming for its pound of flesh in Uganda. It's a story we have seen many times before. Different settings, but the same strategy. A struggling borrower, a big loan, and some ruthless and secretive terms of agreement. We call this a debt trap. You expect it from small-time village lenders or loan sharks, but not from a wannabe superpower. In 2015, China laid a debt trap in Uganda. Their Exim Bank lent $200 million to the Ugandan government. This money was used to expand the Entebbe airport. It is the only international airport in Uganda. What were the terms of this loan? No one knows. Can you believe it? In classic Chinese style, everything was kept a secret. Until now. Now, new reports talk about 13 problematic Chinese terms, 13 problematic terms. Ugandan officials describe them as, quote-unquote, eroding the country's sovereignty. For instance, all airport plans and budgets must be surrendered to the Exim Bank. And if Uganda fails to repay the loan, China can take possession of the airport. Reports say that's where things are heading. Uganda is on the brink of default. They've already tried negotiating with China, no luck there. At this rate, Uganda's only international airport will soon be a Chinese asset. Mission debt trap success. Officially, both Uganda and China have denied these reports. Here's what the Ugandan government says, and I'm quoting from their statement. We cannot give away a national asset like an international airport. We've said it before and repeat that it has not happened and is not going to happen. The loan terms provide for a 7-year grace period during which only interest is paid, and the government has not defaulted on those obligations. Fair enough. What happens when the grace period ends? In 2022, Uganda will have to begin payments, not just interest, but the principal loan amount as well. They will have to pay. What if it cannot make those payments? Well, Uganda can say goodbye to their airport, and this is exactly how a debt trap works. But if you ask the Chinese, it's all a conspiracy. Here's what the Chinese embassy in Uganda says. Which of the Chinese projects in Africa have been confiscated? None. The hype surrounding China's debt trap in Africa has no factual basis and is being pushed on malicious grounds. Well, that's a hard sell. In the last 2 decades, China has sunk Africa under a pile of debt. And we have numbers, like always. $153 billion from 2000 to 2019. $153 billion. And all of this money was borrowed by the public sector, so it's government debt. And 45% of these obligations are on sub-Saharan Africa. It is among the poorest places on earth. You can understand why Chinese loans may sound appealing to these countries, but Beijing does not lend out of goodwill, make no mistake. It does not want prosperity or development, it wants a colonial empire. African countries are paying a huge price for this predatory lending. Let's come back to Uganda's case. Entebbe is the only international airport in this country. You could say it is a gateway to Uganda. It is an integral part of the country's history. Not good history, but history nonetheless. In 1976, this airport was the site of a daring hostage rescue. Back then, Uganda was ruled by military dictator Idi Amin. He supported a group of Palestinian terrorists who hijacked an Air France plane. Ultimately, a unit of Israeli commandos was deployed to rescue them. There were 106 hostages. Out of these, 102 were rescued. And all of this happened at the Entebbe airport. And since then, Hollywood has made movies on this hijacking. It's an undeniable part of Ugandan history. And pretty soon, it could become the latest victim of Chinese colonialism. We've seen it happen before. Just look at the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Same thing, exactly the same thing. The Lankan government could not repay the Chinese. They ended up signing away the Hambantota port on a 99-year lease. And these loans, Chinese loans, may seem like a bad investment. You get no interest, you get no repayment. But that's exactly what China wants. That's what every loan shark wants. They target low and middle income countries, straddle them with massive debt, wait for them to default, and then grab their national assets. The question then is, how can the world stop this? By offering better options. These countries need money. If you want them to stop borrowing from China, you'll have to give them something. The G7 is talking about its own loan packages. So is the Quad. And these alternatives can pull countries away from China's debt trap. Until then, the world must demand transparency. Trillion-dollar loans cannot be signed in secrecy. Their terms must be public. There must be some kind of oversight, because we all know what every loan shark hates: regulation. Well, staying on topic, here's something else that China hates: our channel. And it's flattering, to be honest. If Beijing hates us, rest assured we are doing something right. This time, it's standing up for Taiwan. Last week, we broadcast a special show on Taiwan. Some of you may have watched it. We talked about Taiwan's economic growth, the politics, the culture, and frankly, it was a good report card, even if I say so myself. It was an overview of Taiwan, but not according to China. Their embassy in New Delhi is having a social media meltdown. Look at what they've said. We express firm opposition to some Indian media that provided platform for Taiwan independence forces, urge them to adhere to one China principle and avoid sending wrong messages to the public. This is classic China. A lot of criticism, but no names. What are they scared of? We don't talk about a self-ruled island near the South China Sea. We say Taiwan. Our show featured an interview with Ambassador Bao. He's Taiwan's representative in India. Clearly, the interview enraged Beijing. And that is our best feedback, we say. A massive tick for the show and for our journalism. And this obsession did not begin recently, we can tell you. For a country that has banned us, China sure watches a lot of WION. And like all loyal viewers, they always have something to say. I can give you instances. April 2020, we ran a report exposing China's faulty testing kits. It was a big controversy. The tests were so bad that the Chinese company lost its import license for India. The company responded to our report with a press release. Fair enough. They have a right to respond, and they did. But guess what happened next? The same press release of a private company was circulated by the Chinese embassy in India, complete with screenshots from this show. Next time around, we got a letter. This was in October 2020. We had interviewed Taiwan's foreign minister, Joseph Wu. China sent us a 5-page rant for a 30-minute interview. It was the usual stuff. Don't about Taiwan, uphold the one China policy, and so on. Just think about what that letter meant. One of the most powerful countries in the world writing 5 pages of grievances against a foreign broadcaster. And for what? For doing their job. It tells you how insecure the Chinese regime is, how fragile its ego is. Now, we appreciate foreign governments watching our reportage. All governments, for that matter. But we do not appreciate diktats and threats. And I know this is difficult for the party officials in Beijing to understand. After all, every Chinese media outlet comes with the prefix state-owned. Well, not here in India. We have consistently reported on Taiwan. We have invited many Taiwanese leaders on our shows. And we will continue to do so. Our coverage has nothing to do with the Indian government's position on Taiwan. It is purely based on facts. Like what's been happening in the Taiwan Strait. Hundreds of Chinese jets have been entering Taiwan's air defense zone. There was no provocation, no threat, just China acting like a bully. And then today, Baltic lawmakers met Taiwan's president. It was a big moment in the island's diplomatic history. We will report all such events and incidents. We will also report Beijing's piracy in the South China Sea and their belligerence along the line of actual control. It may offend the communist bigwigs. It may ruffle some important feathers. But that's called independent journalism. Again, an alien concept for the Chinese government. So here's our message to Beijing. Keep watching our reports, keep tracking our shows, keep releasing statements, because there is no better praise for our work. Let's turn to Pakistan. 2 scams have been unearthed in Pakistan. They involve the Pakistan government and the Pakistan army. The government has been accused of squandering IMF-allocated loans. And the army has been accused of constructing cinema halls on defense land. Now, these are 2 very different but very interesting stories. And they tell you the state of the Pakistani establishment. We'll start with the government. The Pakistan government recently released an audit report, a report on the expenditures it has incurred during the pandemic. Now, this report was meant for the IMF, International Monetary Fund. It had asked Pakistan to give a detailed account of where it spent the money that it had been given. And this was 6 months back. Pakistan held on to the report for 6 long months. But they had to submit it at some point. That was this weekend. They finally gave in. But the report that they've submitted shows misprocurements, payments to ineligible beneficiaries, and cash withdrawals through fake biometrics. And wait till you hear how much money we're talking about, how much all these irregularities are worth. 40 billion Pakistani rupees, 40 billion. That's more than $226 million. According to auditors, these irregularities are too evident and too big to ignore, and they're spread across the Pakistani establishment, from the government to the military, from state-owned enterprises to relief bodies. Everyone squandered the money. The maximum irregularities were found in a government-sponsored cash transfer scheme. They're worth 25 billion rupees. which is almost $141 million. Next, Pakistan's National Disaster Management Authority has irregular spending to the tune of 4.8 billion rupees. That's $27 million approximately. And Pakistan's Defence Ministry had irregular spending to the tune of 3.2 billion rupees. Again, that's almost $18 million. These numbers are based on the accounts of Pakistan's government agencies and the various federal departments involved in relief activities. The auditors say there is no record of where these departments spent the money. Where did the money go? The Pakistan government has been asked to clarify. If it fails to give an explanation, the IMF might put the next loan tranche on hold. Prime Minister Imran Khan is in a fix. He's not the only one, though. The Pakistani army is also in a tight spot. The charge it's facing is quite different, though. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has accused the army, for a change, of using defence land for commercial purposes, for wedding halls and cinema theatres, to be precise. The Pakistani army is building theatres and banquets on defence land. Land that was allotted to the army for the purpose of national security. The army is using it to mint money. Now, Pakistan's judiciary has slammed it for doing so. It conducted a hearing this afternoon, in fact, where the Chief Justice of Pakistan came down heavily on the country's defence secretary. He said, and I'm quoting, "This land was given to you for strategic and defence purposes, yet you have started commercial activities on it, were wedding halls, cinemas and housing societies built for defence purposes. The colonels and majors are acting like kings. Go and tell them this cannot continue." It certainly can't. But when has the Pakistan army ever executed judicial orders? When has it ever followed court orders? All we can do is hope for the safety of the judges who conducted this hearing. We'll keep tracking this story. In Ukraine, meanwhile, the president might need protection too. Volodymyr Zelensky has made a big claim. He's the president of Ukraine. He says that in less than 36 hours from now, the Russians could attempt a coup, and Ukraine's richest man could be backing the plot to overthrow him. Is the threat of a coup in Ukraine real? What is the United States doing to protect its ally Zelensky? Our next report has the details.
The situation is tense on the Ukraine border. A massive Russian troop buildup is challenging Kyiv. But that's not the only threat right now. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has dropped another shell.
We received information that a coup will take place in our country. Interesting information, isn't it? I think it's important information on 1st and 2nd December.
The allegations are sensational. Zelensky says that on the 1st or 2nd December, a coup will be attempted in Kyiv. It will be backed by Russia, and it involves Rinat Akhmetov, the richest man in Ukraine. Zelensky made the charge 3 days ago. He claimed Iranian intelligence had uncovered the plot. They have some audio intercepts. It is of a conversation between a group of Ukrainians and Russians. Zelensky says this group is plotting to take him down, and they are ready to spend $1 billion to destabilize Ukraine.
But I can add, we not only have agential information, but we even have audio recordings on which representatives of Ukraine discussing with representatives of Russia participation of Rinat Akhmetov in a coup in Ukraine, and that $1 billion will be solicited. I think that they have tried to set up businessman Rinat Akhmetov. I think that this is an operation and they try to drag him into the war against Ukraine. I think he has started this war. And I think that unfortunately it will be his great mistake, because one cannot be at war against his own people, against the president elected by the Ukrainian people.
So, who is Rinat Akhmetov? He was one of Ukraine's top oligarchs with a net worth of more than $7 billion. Akhmetov has his fingers in many pies: mining, steel, telecom, energy, finance, even real estate. But Akhmetov is not just a businessman. He is also an oligarch with influence. Akhmetov owns a media empire. It includes the fourth most popular TV channel of Ukraine, as well as nearly 13% of the local television market. These media outlets are no fans of Zelensky. In the 2019 election, Akhmetov's TV channel had backed an opponent of Zelensky. Now they have increased their criticism of the Ukrainian president. Akhmetov denies that he is involved in plotting a coup. But his media networks are certainly weakening Zelensky. In recent days, Kyiv has tried to take control of the narrative. The Ukrainian government is still struggling. It depends heavily on the United States to defend itself against Russia. Earlier this month, the Biden administration tried to press Moscow. As he tries to decipher the designs behind Putin's escalation, US President Joe Biden is facing calls to open a dialogue with Russia again.
Have you talked to Zelensky or Putin? Are you going to?
In all probability.
Biden has tried that before. Back in June, he sat down with Putin for a one-on-one meeting. The summit didn't yield. A few months later, 92,000 Russian troops have amassed at Ukraine's borders. A new migrant crisis has erupted in Poland. And Europe is accusing Russia of starting an energy crisis by cutting back on gas supplies. Now, the threat of a coup in Ukraine is only exposing the limits of Biden's diplomatic initiatives. Bureau Report, World is One.
Let's now talk about something that's often brushed under the rug: depression. Not the kind you experience after a bad day at work or after an unfortunate event that leaves you sad. I'm talking about the persistent, unshakable feeling of being lost with no solution in sight, the lack of motivation to do anything, dwelling on the past too much, or fretting about the future too much, the constant sense of guilt or worthlessness. Now, in all fairness, we've all experienced some or all of this at some point in our lives, and we've learned to get over it and move on. But some people don't. In some cases, it's a serious medical condition. It affects daily work, it hurts relationships, and evolves into a chronic health condition sometimes. This depression requires help, medical and psychiatric. The problem is not everybody seeks it. People avoid the subject and the problem, some out of shame and fear of stigma, some because they don't want to share personal details, and some because they feel they can deal with it themselves. Now, this depression is hard to confirm or quantify, but that's set to change. Thanks to science, we may now have the first ever cure for depression, a blood test that can confirm depression and match you to the right medication. The so-called cure is part of a breakthrough study, a study by the Indiana University School of Medicine. It was published in April this year. 7 months on, health experts are endorsing it. What does the study say? It talks about a blood test composed of RNA biomarkers. This may sound complicated, it's not. RNA is ribonucleic acid. It is a basic component of our cells. Biomarkers are molecules found in the body that are signs of a condition or a disease, like markers. So this test has RNA biomarkers. And the test can tell you 3 things. 1, how serious your depression is. 2, whether you'll experience severe depression in future. And 3, if you're at risk of developing bipolar disorder. How can you possibly know all of this through a blood test? It's a fascinating process. Allow me to explain. You see, every system in the body, the brain, the nervous system, the immune system, they all have a common developmental root. So when you're happy or depressed, there's a certain psychological and neurological reaction that affects all the systems. You feel it. Your body releases certain hormones that affect your immune system and blood supply. Now, this study says that certain biomarkers present in your blood can be used to determine your condition. These biomarkers serve as indicators of your biological state, markers or sadness. For this study, researchers relied on the most important biomarkers: RNA, which like I told you, is ribonucleic acid, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and blood protein. There are 9 others, but these are the major biomarkers in the human body. So scientists studied these biomarkers to track the mood of patients over a period of time. They spotted these biomarkers depending on how you're feeling. And then they used antidepressants to see how the biomarkers responded, how they changed after the antidepressants. So now we have a list of biomarkers or conditions and the medicines that work best on them. To put it very simply, what these scientists did was connect physiology with biology, combine physiological causes with the biological basis of depression. They say this can cut down on years of trial and error. Frankly, that's what we've relied upon so far, trial and error. That's what characterizes the treatment of a mental health condition so far. This experiment can change all of that. It can replace hospitalization and psychiatric procedures with a precise medicine. Today, it takes years for full symptoms of depression to evolve and years more to treat it. This study says that through objective blood tests, patients can be provided with immediate relief, just as they do for a fever or cold. It sounds good to hear, but how well can it be executed? So far, scientists have tried this treatment on 300 patients, and it has worked on all of them. There are millions out there who suffer from depression. Can they all be treated through a simple blood test? We hope they can, but science, we know, works on evidence, so we'll have to wait and see. And before I end the show tonight, here's a question I want to ask. It's about a relatively new trend on social media. I'm sure most of you have noticed it. Every social media account has a biography, a short description of the user. People usually write where they work or what they like, their hobbies, things like that. Nowadays, some users also write pronouns, like he or him, her or she, or they. You must have seen this. Gender pronouns. They denote what gender you identify with. A few years back, this was a non-issue. It's not anymore. Pronouns are a political minefield nowadays. Using the wrong pronoun is like an insult. So many languages have introduced gender-neutral pronouns like they. It was declared as Word of the Year in 2019, they. But can this change be replicated in all languages? Take French, for instance. It would be a logistical nightmare because French is a gendered language. The pronoun you use, the adjective you use, it reflects the gender of the person or object you're talking about. There is no gender-neutral pronoun in the French language. But now some linguists are trying to introduce it, like Le Petit Robert, the best-known French dictionary. They will introduce a gender-neutral pronoun from 2022. They're calling it il, a merger of the two French pronouns il and elle. The question is, will the French buy it? They're fiercely protective of their language. So this pronoun experiment was always going to be a risk, but it's already backfiring. Here's what the French education minister has said about the new dictionary. Its authors are the militants of a cause that has nothing French about it, he says. He's talking about the woke culture. It doesn't have many fans in France. Even the First Lady is a staunch opponent. Here's how she reacted. There are two pronouns, he and she. Our language is beautiful and two pronouns are appropriate. The First Lady of France. Many in France feel this way. They talk about a woke assault from the US. Things that challenge basic French ideals. So here's the question. Are these changes for the sake of change? Do they improve gender equity? Or does it defeat the purpose? For instance, would the trans community prefer equality in pronouns or actual economic and social equality? In an ideal world, both, yes. But in this case, we must prioritize. Cosmetic changes are not a substitute for meaningful reforms. Sure, they make you feel good. But there is no systemic progress. Let me give you another example. This is from Scotland. Scottish secondary schools have been experimenting with gender-neutral washrooms. It's been a disaster, to say the least. Girls are boycotting the washroom because of vandalism by boys. Surveys show that 56% of Scottish people are against gender-neutral washrooms. Why then are these schools trying them out? Encourages diversity, they say. Well, whatever the intent, the result has been quite the opposite. Experiments like this one are counterproductive. They become a bad advertisement for gender reforms. So what could Scotland have done? Perhaps retain single-sex washrooms, offer both services and let the people decide. This has always been the problem with woke culture. Nobody is questioning the intentions, but the method can be too extreme sometimes. Like changing the laws of French or installing common washrooms against common wisdom. Gestures are not a measure of change. They're a tool to create buzz. Good for the headlines, not so much for social equality. Think about it. We're wrapping the show, leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.